The committee will come to order. I note that a quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. Without objection, members of the full committee not on this subcommittee are authorized to participate in today's hearing. The committee is meeting today pursuant to the notice to hear testimony on an overview of diversity trends in the financial services industry. I will now recognize myself for 5 minutes to give opening statements. To the members, I'd also like to advise you that votes may be called around 2:20 or 2:30. We will proceed with opening statements from myself, from Ranking Member Wagner, and 5 minutes to our witness if time allows before recessing for votes. Thank you for joining me today for this first historic hearing of the newly established Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion. I would like to take time to thank Ranking Member Ann Wagner and members of this committee for serving on the Subcommittee for Diversity and Inclusion, which I am proud to chair. Diversity and inclusion issues are important to me. Before I came to Congress, I worked directly with government agencies, nonprofits, and major corporations, including financial institutions, on how to create more diverse workplaces. As such, I understand the challenges that both industry and government face in overcoming the obstacles that can prevent the full inclusion of diverse populations. I am honored to bring my experience on this issue to the committee. Under the leadership of Chairman Waters, the Financial Services Committee created this subcommittee to institutionalize the consideration of diversity and inclusion issues, create a forum for discussing diversity data and trends, raising awareness, and reviewing and assessing how the financial services industry maintains and grows their inclusiveness of people of color, women, urban and rural persons, persons of disability, LGBTQ, millennials, Native Americans, and active duty servicemen, and our nation's veterans. It is no secret that the lack of diversity and inclusion in our society leads to persistent income inequities that also growing the wealth gap, which we are prepared to explore. Now let us look at some statistics. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, within the next 25 years, more than half of all Americans are expected to belong to a minority group. Additionally, the Equal Opportunity Commission, commonly known as the EEOC, reported in 2013 that while women represent 53.2% of the professionals, they make up only about 38.6% of employees at the management level. The EEOC also reported in 2013 that although African Americans and Hispanics collectively represent almost half of the service workers and laborers industries, they are disproportionately underrepresented in the professional and management ranks. A larger, more diverse talent pool should lead to a more diverse workforce. And yet, despite increased awareness of the business importance of diversity in the workplace and elsewhere in society, troubling disparities persist that affects recruitment, retention, and promotion. These disparities are very pronounced in the financial services industry, in particular as today's hearing and witnesses testimonies will demonstrate. For instance, according to the GAO office, from 2007 to 2015, the percentage of African American managers in the financial services industry decreased from an already low 6.5% to 6.3% and remained largely unchanged for women at 45%. As I look around this room, we are representative of different cultures, different regions of the country, and different views. As the Nobel laureate Maya Angelou has appropriately famously quoted, that I paraphrase, "In diversity there is beauty and there is strength." We should know that diversity makes for a rich tapestry, and we must understand that all threads of that tapestry are equal in value no matter their color. During the course of this Congress, we will analyze diversity and inclusion trends and data, exercise oversight of what regulators and industries are doing in this space, highlight best practices, and consider legislation that may be needed to change the culture in government and industry, and move the needle in a positive direction on the issues of diversity and inclusion in our nation. Numerous studies have proven empirically that diversity increases productivity and the bottom line. Yet the data on diversity and inclusion efforts in our nation's industries and government are not aligned. We need to find out why, and we need to fix it now. I look forward to working with all members of this committee in a bipartisan manner and conducting this subcommittee with civility and respect for all members. Now, I'd like to say welcome to the Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion. I look forward to hearing the testimony of today's witness, Daniel Garcia-Diaz, who serves as Director in GAO's Financial Markets and Community Investment Team, an expert in analyzing and assessing diversity and inclusion. The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 4 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. It's an honor to be with you this afternoon, holding the inaugural hearing of this new, very important subcommittee. I look forward to working with you and Chairwoman Waters as we examine how best to promote diversity and inclusion in the financial services industry. Women and minorities are growing their numbers and securing leadership positions on Main Street, Wall Street, and as elected officials. However, there is still much work to be done to ensure that financial industry, along with many other sectors of the U.S. economy, is reaping the benefits of our country's diversity. While we need more data and information, research shows that diversity and inclusion can bring both social and economic benefits to the workplace. A study by the Millikan Institute found that diversity in the composition of organizational groups affects outcomes such as turnover and performance. Several studies have revealed a connection between greater diversity and enhanced financial returns. Further, corporate scandals are less common on boards where women and minorities are represented. This subcommittee's jurisdiction includes overseeing the effectiveness of the offices of Minority and Women Inclusion, known as OMWIs, at a federal financial services agencies. Earlier this month, I contacted the 8 regulatory agencies with offices of Minority and Women Inclusion to further understand agency efforts to increase diversity and inclusion. Today, I do want to welcome Daniel Garcia-Diaz, who authored a November 2017 GAO report examining diversity in the financial services sector. We thank you, Daniel, for taking the time to share your results with us. The findings of the report show that industry's good intentions are not necessarily resulting in increased diversity across the sector. This is an issue across the American economy, from the technology industry to the media. While there is no question that companies are committed to providing opportunity for all employees, and there are many success stories, the report demonstrates that the overall level of diversity within the industry did not significantly improve from 2007 to 2015. After reading this report, it is clear that recruitment and retention are primary challenges that companies face as they try to address diversity in their ranks. Talent among those with diverse backgrounds is equal, but we must do more to promote equality of opportunity. The financial services industry, led first by Omnis, can find ways to better seek out and train promising diverse candidates at first, mid, and senior level career stages. Opportunity starts early, as we've seen in STEM-related professions. It starts early with education and finding ways to attract high school students and undergraduate and graduate students to careers in the financial services sector. I look so forward to working with my friend Chairwoman Beatty on these twofold initiatives, ensuring that the financial services industry is benefiting from America's diversity and ensuring that people from diverse backgrounds and all socioeconomic levels have the resources, access, and pathways to benefit from our robust financial services industry, an industry that has improved the quality of life for so many Americans. I thank you all for coming to this inaugural Diversity and Inclusion Committee hearing, and I thank you, Director Garcia-Diaz, for your testimony this morning. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the full committee for 1 minute.
Well, I thank you, Chairwoman, and thank you for your leadership. And I want to thank the ranking member of the subcommittee, Ann Wagner, who's the full committee vice ranker as well, for her leadership and commitment to this important issue. I support Chairwoman Waters' decision to create this new subcommittee, and I continue to support her work on the issues facing diversity and inclusion in the financial services sector. Additionally, I want to commend Ranking Member Wagner for her diligence on this issue and leadership. 2 weeks ago, the ranking member sent letters to all the offices of Minority and Women Inclusion, better known as OMWIs, at the regulatory agencies to better understand their actions on diversity. The responses from these letters and the information gleaned from this hearing will help this subcommittee identify the appropriate role of Congress on a going forward basis to facilitate greater diversity in the industry and at regulatory agencies. I look forward to the hearing and certainly appreciate all the work that the GAO does in a disciplined study at the direction of Congress.
The chair now recognizes the chairwoman of the full committee for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Today we are convening for the first time the Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion, which will examine and resolve the systemic economic exclusion of women, people of color, persons with disabilities, LGBTQ+, individuals, veterans, and other members of our society who have to fight for a seat at the table. I'm pleased that the subcommittee is beginning with this hearing on an issue that has stymied the financial services industry, including women and minorities in management. Beginning in February 2005, 14 years ago, the Financial Services Committee requested that the GAO review diversity trends in the financial services industry. In 2006, GAO looked at diversity from 1993 to 2004 and reported that the percentages of minorities in management rose from 11.1% to 15.5%, with the percentage of African Americans rising from 5.6% to 6.6%. GAO has since updated its report several times. In GAO's most recent report covering 2007 to 2015, minority representation increased from 17% to 21%. However, the percentage of African Americans in senior roles decreased from 6.5 to 6.3%, and all minorities continue to be underrepresented for years. Policymakers, diversity advocates, and diverse professionals in the financial services industry have sent the message that diversity and inclusion must be more than words. They require action and resolve. Fortunately, the data shows that the financial services industry lacks both. Today, this subcommittee begins the process of shining light on these trends and begins its work to improve the industry so that our financial system works for everybody. And I'm so pleased that Ms. Beatty has taken the leadership on this diversity subcommittee. There's no one else who could do a job better than she can. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Today, we will welcome the testimony of Daniel Garcia-Diaz. Mr. Garcia-Diaz is Director of the Financial Markets and Community Investment at the Government Accountability Office. He is also the author of the GAO report, Trends in Management Representation of Minorities and Women and Diversity Practices, 2007 through 2015. The witness is reminded that his oral testimony will be limited to 5 minutes. Without objection, your written statement will be part of the record. The witness is reminded to turn on his microphone and abide by the 3 lights in front of him. Green means go, yellow means wrap it up, and red means stop. Mr. Garcia, you are now recognized for 5 minutes to give an oral presentation on your testimony.
Chairwoman Beatty, Ranking Member Wagner, and members of the subcommittee, Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here today to discuss GAO's work on trends in workforce diversity in the financial services industry. I'm especially pleased to be participating in the first hearing of the newly established Subcommittee on Diversity and Inclusion. Over the years, GAO has worked with the Financial Services Committee to share information on the extent that minorities and women are making headway in the financial services industry, particularly at the management level. My statement today draws from our most recent report issued in November 2017. Specifically, I will focus on trends in minority and women representation among managers in financial firms from 2007 through 2015, and practices these firms have identified to address challenges in increasing diversity. Unfortunately, the trends are clear. Management-level representation of minorities and women showed marginal or no increase from 2007 through 2015. The situation is more worrying when we look at representation at the senior level. Specifically, minority representation increased from about 11 to 12% in this period. In addition, African American representation decreased not only in percentage terms, but also in absolute numbers. Among first and mid-level managers, and that is just right below the senior level, minority representation increased from 19 to 22% in this period. When we look at women representation, we found that it remained unchanged at the senior level, at around 30%. However, women representation was much stronger among first and mid-level managers at almost 48%. We also looked at representation by different sectors within the financial services. And generally, banks and lenders had greater representation of minorities than the other sectors, such as insurance and securities. In fact, the insurance sector lagged banks by almost 3.5 percentage points. Women representation in management tended to be the highest in the insurance sector. Security sector tended to have the lowest level of women representation. For today's hearing, my team examined EEOC data for 2016, the most recent available at this time, and we observed little or no change since 2015 across many of these measures for minorities. And we also noticed some growth in women representation among first and mid-level managers. Many firms recognize that an inclusive workforce can help attract the best and the brightest and can contribute to innovation in products and services. But simple aspiration for achieving diverse workforce is not enough. Diversity management requires intentional and strategic action that is sustained over the long haul. For this reason, we consulted with financial firms, industry groups, and others to understand the types of practices that they have identified to improve upon current trends. We consistently heard from experts that firms should engage in broad-based recruitment. In other words, firms need to cast their nets wider and not limit themselves to the same schools and the same academic disciplines. In addition, establishing mechanisms to hold managers accountable can help firms move towards their workforce diversity goals. As we have noted in our past work, leadership commitment to diversity is essential, but experts tell us that middle managers may not be as committed as leadership. Accountability measures to ensure that leadership's and managers' efforts are aligned can be established in a variety of ways. For example, one firm representative stated that linking managers' compensation to diversity goals has been an effective practice for retaining women and minorities. Establishing such accountability measure could help ensure that leadership's vision is carried out. Finally, firms and stakeholders we met with agree that data analysis to assess the diversity of their workforce and spotting potential bottlenecks and problems is a key part of effectively managing workforce diversity. Before I conclude, I would like to highlight for the subcommittees GAO's completed and ongoing work in this area. We have issued 8 reports related to diversity in the financial sector. We also have completed a recent report on board diversity at the Federal Home Loan Banks and are currently examining diversity of these banks' workforce and business activities. Building on this wealth of experience, we look forward to assisting the subcommittee. This concludes my opening remarks. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak today, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia-Diaz. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Garcia-Diaz, I have a series of questions, but to get through my 5-minute time period, I'm going to, reference a study, the 2015 international management consultancy firm McKinsey & Company first published a report entitled Diversity Matters, which makes the business case for diversity. That report has since been updated and is the most recent version was published just in January of 2018, entitled Delivering Through Diversity. The most recent report used a data set of over 1,000 companies in 12 different countries using 2 measures of financial performance, earnings before interest and taxes to measure profitability and economic profit margin to measure value creation. This data was used in combination of diversity and inclusion efforts of 17 companies from around the globe to study where diversity matters most and how leading companies have used it successfully. Are you familiar with this report?
Not with the body of work that McKinsey has done, yes, and it seems to build on what we have seen in the past, but not this particular report, no. I have not evaluated it.
So let me give you a little more data before I ask you to respond. The report found that companies in the 25% for executive level gender diversity were 21% more likely to outperform on profitability and 27% more likely to have superior value creation. Additionally, the report found that companies in the top 25% for executive level ethnic and cultural diversity were 33% more likely to have industry-leading profitability. Conversely, the report found that the less diverse executive teams were 29% less likely to achieve above average profitability. In your report, there is a section on research on potential benefits of workforce diversity, and I believe it's on page 7. Can you briefly discuss your findings in that section and how they support the findings that I gave you in the McKinsey study?
So we scanned the literature for the 2017 report, and generally found studies that certainly support the idea that a more diverse culture at a firm can contribute to product innovation, idea generation in groups. It also can contribute to higher levels of satisfaction at the work, which of course can be correlated with better performance. In terms of the association between diversity and financial performance, for the studies we looked at, there have been attempts to make association. Often the challenge with those studies is the causation part. It may be correlated, but we don't know the direction of causality. But again, generally there's a consistent story that is being conveyed through these studies that financial performance can be positively impacted by a diverse workforce. But of course, that's an area that I would say that continued study and research would be needed to really pin these issues down.
Okay, thank you. As you know, in our larger committee of financial services, we deal a lot with banks and credit unions and securities and other activities, insurance and funds and trusts. In your report, you provided a breakdown of financial services industries in those same sectors. There was also some alarming data of decreasing numbers, and you can pick a minority group, whether it's women, whether it's African Americans, or whether it were Hispanics. Did the GAO explore some of these trends in the data and why they exist? Or can you tell me if there are specific diversity management practices that could help us address these discrepancies?
Yeah, so the challenge is with the data that we're working with from EEOC, it's hard to figure out what's going on behind the numbers. So we did consult with experts in the field and industry representatives and firms to get an idea of what's going on. And some of the issues that we heard are certainly kind of, if you've been working in diversity and inclusion issues for a while, sort of the same set of issues are behind it. But one thing I would just highlight in the few seconds here that is, one thing is maybe that we heard was the impact of the financial crisis having on the trends in diversity, and in particular, firms' ability to continue some of the efforts they had in place prior to the financial crisis to ensure that there was adequate recruitment and retainment efforts and seeing through the promotion process to higher levels of management.
Thank you. The gentleman's time is up. And now the gentlewoman from Missouri and ranking member is now recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair. Mr. Garcia-Diaz, it is important to understand, I think, the data in your report. Can you tell me briefly, how do you define diversity for the purposes of your report, and what were the parameters that you identified, and are those consistent with other diversity and inclusion evaluations?
Yeah, so diversity is actually a very broad concept, right? It can include racial and ethnic characteristics, male, female. Those were the ones that we focused on in this study, in particular because that's what was available in the data. And so when we think about diversity and inclusion, it can't really, these are certainly very important components of it, these characteristics, these dimensions, but not the only ones. And so when we think about diversity, we need to think about diversity in veteran status, age, and issues and things like that. And so that's the way we at least envision it. There is no one picture of what a diverse organization looks like. If you can imagine a credit union in Maine versus a global bank in New York City, diversity might be interpreted differently and different for those situations.
There's a need to do, I think, outreach and education in STEM at the undergraduate level. A 2018 Bloomberg article cited testimony from the founder of the Women in Technology and Entrepreneurship in New York, Judith Spitz, who was a CIO of Verizon. And Ms. Spitz stated that their research showed that although there are increasingly higher numbers of women in undergraduate institutions, there are only about 1% of them that are studying, for instance, computer science. Computer sciences and similar disciplines are becoming increasingly crucial to the financial services sector. I believe this is a major impediment when it comes to gender diversity in the financial sector. How do you suggest we remedy this situation?
Yeah, so that certainly speaks to the original kind of pipeline of potential candidates that you have to apply for a financial services job. And as the industry has moved to look at other programs beyond MBAs, but looking at math programs, engineering programs, there is this balancing and concern that while you may be getting disciplinary diversity, you're not necessarily getting, for example, gender diversity, particularly because in some of the sciences, math and engineering, it tends to skew towards male representation.
Our subcommittee is striving to promote increased diversity and inclusion in the financial services sector. There are 2 ways, I think, that this can be accomplished: through punishment or through incentives, the carrot and the stick notion, so to speak. Your research has spoken to the advantages of incentives. Why is the current set of incentives, do you think, not really working?
Well, I think there's been over the years, a shift from this notion of diversity is the right thing to do, we need to do more of it. But how do you make that compelling and incentivize that behavior for managers to promote diversity at all levels of their organization? And so I think this is where the business case argument or framework comes into play, where you find real business reasons why diversity contributes not only to the bottom line, but to the well-being of the organization, employee satisfaction, and things like that. Once you've achieved an organization that is inclusive of people of different backgrounds, race, religion, and so on, ultimately that makes it more inviting for candidates to apply for those types of jobs. And you get this virtuous cycle going that, according at least to some of the conversations we've had with experts, doesn't necessarily exist right now in the financial services.
Any specific incentives that have been proven to increase diversity in these financial firms, do you think?
Well, I mean, it's one of those things I wish I could say that there's 2 or 3 things, but when we talk to the experts, they have to try all different methods.
We talked about flex time, we talked about lifestyle issues, for mentorship. I've gone through your GAO study, and any of those kinds of things
Yes,
come
and
to
so
mind?
our work highlights actually things like mentorship, outreach to the community and schools, to introduce students to the financial services, that it's a viable career
We
path.
see that in STEM quite a bit, but we'd love to see that more so in the financial services sector.
Sure. And I think a lot more can happen in that space. And again, if you take my comment earlier that had some of those efforts slowed down since the financial crisis, you know, then it would be a useful area for a lot of firms to focus on.
Well, my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, the chairman of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm so honored to be a part of this committee. I'm especially honored because you are the chairperson, and you have always been involved with the committees that I've been associated with. And I wanted to make sure that I was here today to be a part of this historic meeting. This is unprecedented, and I'm proud and honored to be associated with this committee. Let me quickly indicate that I believe the tone and tenor is set, tone and tenor are set by the persons at the top. And if you have a diversity mentality, you're likely to understand recruitment and retention. You're likely to understand unconscious bias. You're likely to understand why you have to intentionally move forward in your recruiting efforts to acquire, maintain diversity. And you understand that it's important to train your managers and then your employees about inclusion and unconscious bias. So let me just ask this question, if I may. Have we, in our efforts to diversify, placed emphasis on bonuses for the people at the top who can cause diversity to be reflected throughout the organization? Bonuses.
Yes, and I think you're touching on issues that we've highlighted as critical, not only the leadership commitment to diversity to begin to set those goals and priorities for the whole organization, but then how do you carry that out? How do you ensure that people are taking actions to address that? And so we have in the report, in our 2017 report, we reiterated here in the testimony, is the issue of introducing accountability for middle managers to ensure that they are living up to this vision, which includes linking managers' performance at meeting diversity goals to their compensation. That would be one method, for instance.
And to what extent is this being done throughout the industry?
We don't have data on that. It's strictly at this point anecdotal what we've heard, that some firms are doing this. If it's widespread, we just don't have the data on that.
And have you found in your research that where it is implemented that you get greater results, better results?
Yes, and so for the firms that did report using, they thought it did actually contribute positively to their ability to not only recruit but also retain talented minority and women.
And is it true that you found, I think you've said as much, but I'll just ask and then I'm going to yield because I know that time is of the essence. But is it true that you have found that when you have a person who intentionally, who's at the top, who intentionally wants to recruit and diversify, that you get greater results? Seems that the answer would be a simple yes, but I'd like it for the record.
Yes, and so it is a simple answer, yes. And that's a practice that in our interviews with experts and researchers have identified that it needs to be intentional.
So the reverse or perverse of that would be then that if you find places where you don't have the balance that we seek, the diversity, there's a good likelihood that someone at the top is not emphasizing it appropriately.
And that's one possibility.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I will yield back because I understand time is of the essence.
Thank you. The gentleman yields. To the members, votes have been called on the floor, so the committee will pause for votes and resume immediately after votes. The committee stands in recess. The committee will come to order. The gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Gonzalez, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Let me first start by saying how much I'm looking forward to working with my fellow Buckeye, Chairwoman Beatty, and also Ranking Member Wagner on this subcommittee. My short time in Congress, I've learned that these two women have an unmatched commitment to improving the lives of their constituents and are both excellent choices to lead this subcommittee. Ms. Beatty in particular, I followed for many years and know that this important issue is one that she has been championing in my home state, and I look forward to working with her on helping make Ohio a shining example of a diverse and inclusive financial sector and workforce. Lastly, I want to thank Chairwoman Beatty and Ranking Member Wagner for starting this subcommittee in what I consider to be exactly the right place, which is a thorough review of what the data tells us about our present situation. I think we start with data, we start with an open, honest dialogue about what our current position is, how we got here, what the trends are, and then as we're grounded in data, we consider policies, their effects positively or negatively, and how that will stay foremost in our minds. So I think that's an excellent way to start, and I thank both of you for that leadership. I'm proud of two great examples in Ohio. One, Key Bank, headquartered right outside my district in Cleveland, Ohio. They've received the designation as one of Diversity Inc. top 50 companies for diversity, having a board of directors that is 50% diverse by gender and race. This includes implementing a mentor program for senior and junior employees, focusing on holistic benefits packages, and training management employees in unconscious bias. Huntington Bank, also headquartered in Ohio, has also made tremendous strides in diversity. In 2018, Huntington invested $142 million in the economic success of diverse businesses. Huntington is also committed to encouraging a diverse workforce with a board of directors that is 30% diverse, a senior management team that is 42% diverse, and a total workforce that is 64% diverse. The progress made at Key and Huntington show that the industry has made strides forward, although I recognize that there's certainly much work to be done. So, Mr. Garcia-Diaz, first I want to thank you for waiting out our votes and everybody else who stuck around. I think the data that you presented is obviously important data, and what we've seen today is primarily aggregate data. When you drill down into regions, subregions, different sectors of the industry, are there certain areas where we're seeing bright spots that we can be excited about, that we can say, hey, you know, this area or this part of the industry is doing a really good job on this front, and maybe we need to kind of study them a little bit?
Yeah, so if you look at the data, even in our 2017 report, we actually have an appendix that goes down to state-level reporting, not just national. You see actually a dramatic variance across states. And that shouldn't surprise us. So you could look at California and Florida, and they have obviously a large Hispanic population, and as a result, you do see higher than average.
Did you control for that in the data at all? Can you?
No, we're just reporting.
No, okay.
Yeah, we're not doing an econometric kind of analysis where we're controlling for other features.
Okay.
It's more of descriptive statistics.
Okay.
But I think that is an area that does provide actually some good area for future work, is to look at that kind of variation, not only across region, but types of industries.
Okay. Great. And then a second question, kind of in the same vein. When this has been done well, and when folks have kind of achieved, you know, meaningful outcomes in diversity, what best practices are you seeing, or did you not go into that much in the reporting?
No, so we did consult with firms and industry groups to identify what seemed to be promising practices. You mentioned some of them in your remarks. Those include mentoring programs. We also, to add to some of the items that you mentioned, family-friendly policies, especially is useful for women to be able to stay in the organization long enough so that they can get promoted to the higher levels.
Great. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from California, the chairman of our full committee, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I do have a question that I'd like to raise about recruiting. Mr. Garcia-Diaz, since 2005, this committee has asked the GAO to review diversity in the financial services industry. In multiple reports, GAO has continued to emphasize that, and I quote, without a sustained commitment among financial services firms to overcoming challenges to recruiting and retaining minority candidates, limited progress would be possible in fostering a more diverse workplace. Unfortunately, GAO's conclusions are correct. Now, what barriers, if any, exist that prevent financial services firms from increasing minority recruitment? What more could financial services firms do to improve their recruitment practices? What can Congress do to hold them accountable?
In order to make that recruitment more effective than it has been, financial services institutions need to look beyond their traditional sources of talent. And we identified, just looking beyond the typical schools, academic programs, and things like that, to identify new sources of diverse candidates for their recruitment. In addition, firms can do more in terms of reaching out to the communities, to schools, to get students and potential candidates connected and realize that this is a potential career path for them, and to start that process of stimulating interest in the industry.
Well, I think you have indicated in your report that the talent pools from which financial services firms could hire individuals are diverse. Specifically, you found that 1/3 of the persons obtaining graduate or undergraduate degrees between 2011 and 2015 were racially or ethnically diverse. However, this level of diversity is not at all reflected in the financial services industry. Many of us tell us they go to the colleges and universities, and they are all telling us they go to Georgia and they're recruiting, but it's not reflected in their pool of workers. So what's happening between the time that they recruit, so-called, and the fact that they're not hired and they don't show up in their workplace? What do you think happens?
Well, there's the other problem. Even if you are doing the recruitment in the right area, if the candidates are looking at the firm and they're finding that the firm is not as diverse as it could be, that itself can act as a barrier. And so whenever we look at any of these approaches, it's not just one thing. It's not just go to one school and try to recruit there. It has to be a combination approach which includes more extensive outreach and education about what they do for those students, because the academic programs that we have nationwide are extremely diverse. Minority candidates and women are not hiding. They are out there, they are available, but a lot of times it's making the case and making it convincing that this is a possibility for them.
Can you think of any incentives?
I'm sorry?
Can you think of any incentives?
Disincentives for it?
Incentives that could be offered to the colleges and, to the firms, the financial firms on Wall Street that would be interesting and...
Yeah, so the leadership of the firms have to put pressure and incentives for managers to really take this responsibility seriously and to heart. It is not a check-the-box activity. It's something more substantial commitment that's required. And so that goes back to what I think is kind of the fundamental part is making sure that middle managers in the organization who are doing the interviews and the recruitment are held accountable, that they are, in fact, doing the best job they can to share information with potential candidates and recruit them.
Well, that's an interesting idea, that incentives to management who has had the responsibility for hiring, and that could be done in any number of ways, and perhaps in their annual reviews and some other kinds of things.
Yes, I mean, so that's the kind of accountability mechanisms that you can have, that it's part of the performance review. It affects, potentially it's a consideration in pay and bonus, and even just reporting requirements and being subjected to scrutiny is another powerful tool.
Well, thank you so much, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Style, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Garcia-Diaz, thanks for coming today. I want to follow up on the question that my colleague, Mr. Gonzalez, had. As I looked at your report, I noticed that diversity trends in the financial services industries are not uniform across some of the subgroups. So for instance, banks and credit unions tended to be more diverse than, say, insurance companies. Do we observe any common features in more diverse industries and companies, or what leads one industry to have a more diverse workforce than another based on your research?
Yeah, so to speak to those specific trends, I think is a little bit challenging given the data that we have. However, when in doing the research, we did identify studies where there are certain types of jobs in the financial industry that may be perceived as being less welcoming of women, let's say. And so certain areas would be like trading in securities business. And in fact, you see that the securities representation line is relatively low compared to other sectors.
Less welcoming on the entry level side? Is that what you mean by less
no,
welcoming, or less welcoming across the board?
Yeah, no, I'm talking about at the management level.
The management level, okay,
Side.
okay.
And so we heard from experts that there are certain types of kind of responsibilities and occupations that may be perceived being more male-dominated and less welcoming in that sense. And so we also heard, at least, and we can't tell this from the data, but we heard that sometimes in the management figures that we're looking at, it's unclear whether the minority employee or the woman employee is working kind of in the business forward side of the business, as opposed to, say, accounting, human resources, and things like that. And so that's an interesting area, again, that if there were data to explore, that just because they're in the financial services industry, just because they're in banking or insurance, we don't really know what their occupation, the specific occupation is that they're doing under that rubric.
Gotcha. Thank you. I want to shift gears slightly over to the education side. Education is a powerful tool that allows people to get that first step up as they head in towards a higher level management position in some of these industries. I served on the University of Wisconsin Board of Regents prior to coming to Congress, and was proud of the fact that we put in place policies to control the cost of education. So if a student was going to UW-Madison, was from a family that made less than $56,000 a year, the median income in the state of Wisconsin, the tuition and fees at the University of Wisconsin-Madison is free, it's covered. And so that gives individuals an opportunity to get a step up. You mentioned in your testimony that some of the financial services firms surveyed told research they had broadened the list of schools that they had gone to recruit from beyond just a handful of maybe elite schools on the East Coast. Can you share any information as to how successful those efforts may have been?
Yeah, only sort of in terms of what we heard from the folks that we interviewed, and generally they were positive about those efforts in expanding beyond the normal circle of schools that they recruit from. And in particular, it's stated as a challenge when managers kind of focus on a few schools and trying to get them to actually think more broadly and expand beyond what they're accustomed to is one of the challenges that some of the folks we interviewed cited. And so, while I can't speak to what's happening nationally, but at least anecdotally, folks are reporting back that it is a promising practice.
Thank you, that's helpful. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and it's indeed an honor for me to serve with you and try to tackle some of the issues that are in front of us today. And before I begin, I just wanted to say that I served as the elected city controller in Houston from 1998 plus 5 years till 2003. And probably one of the most disheartening things for me was dealing with the financial world, not because I couldn't handle the work, but because who I face sometimes. It seems like any meeting that I went to, whether it was to negotiate a depository contract for a banking contract or select investment bankers for a bond deal or anything that I did, it really was still a man's world, and it was also very white. I still remember when they took me up to the floor when they were trading, when our first pricing, I didn't see anything but, quite frankly, blonde, blue-eyed, white shirts and ties. I'm happy now that the last time I spoke to a public finance group, it's changed a little bit. But we haven't really quite done enough, it seems. So what you said earlier today caught my ear when you said something that diversity is interpreted differently in different areas. Is there a way to get a better handle on what diversity really is and set real goals and timetables for some of the people in the financial services industry? Because it seems to me that we're not even quite there yet. And it's more than diversity, it's also inclusion and really a commitment to it. So what else can we be doing in this arena?
Yeah, and I think that's the significant challenge ahead of us is what does it look like, and then what do we need to do to get there? And there's no, as I mentioned before, there's really no easy answer to that question. But I think there are steps that firms can take to really enhance their diversity management in their organization. But first, you have to commit to it. You have to see this as a priority, and then do other things that we highlight in our prior work, practices that help organization achieve the kind of diversity that they're hoping to achieve. And what informs that, in terms of what does that diversity look like, is really looking at who your customer base is, where are you located, what does your community look like.
Right, because I've always thought that the easy answer is that your workforce should look like the people that you're serving.
Yep.
So that's easy enough. So I just sometimes get really baffled that they make it so hard. But I'll move on to another question related to that. So we focused on the services. Have you seen any studies, or have you all done any studies on then looking at the access to those institutions?
Access by?
By the customer, the consumer?
Yes, but I don't have information on that. I'm sorry.
You don't at all? It's just the diversity and inclusion of the workforce in terms of the studies you've done so far?
Yes, the part of it is, the agency has done work in terms of the looking at, in a very specific area, looking at business activities and contracting with and conducting business with minority organizations to support minority or women-owned businesses, if that's what you're referring to.
Right. So what studies have you actually done just on inclusion?
Yes.
That diversity, coincidentally, I also was an EEOC hearings examiner, and, they tend to just look at the numbers, look at the percentages, and look at the EEO profiles of the companies. But you can have someone there, again, I'll use my experience when I was controller, and if a minority or a woman came in with the investment banking team, it was usually the one who was carrying the presentation books and was never really included in being part of the presenters. They just carried the books. That I used to sometimes just have to look at the person and say, well, Mary Sue, you haven't said anything, what do you think? I'd have to ask to get them included. So how do we really look at inclusion, making sure that they're really part of the company, given training, given opportunities to grow within that particular company?
Yes, and that's the cultural shift that has to happen, and one of the things we identify is education and training component to make people aware of the consequences of the kind of behavior you described just now.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The gentleman from West Virginia, Mr. Moody, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Garcia-Diaz, thank you for coming and providing your expertise. Really appreciate it. we can all agree that efforts to increase diversity can always be improved, but it's important to point out that diversity and inclusion are two different factors. That's why this committee has two different names for that. So in the Harvard Business Review study, researchers have found that diversity in the workforce will not succeed without the inclusion factor. The study cited Verna Myers, a noted diversity advocate, who stated, quote, "Diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance," close quotes. So, Mr. Garcia, inclusion is the driving force to make lasting impacts on the diversity of a workforce. So if that is the goal, what has the data shown are the most crucial factors in affecting inclusion?
Yes, and you're absolutely right. I think a lot of the research does point to the importance of inclusion as diversity is not enough in a lot of ways, and that you do need that inclusiveness to make sure that people are making meaningful contributions in the firms that they work for. In terms of the data, our data doesn't necessarily speak to that, at least the data analysis that we did of EEOC information that's reported by financial firms. And so it's hard to kind of take the temperature, in a sense, of the firms and to see to what degree they are embracing and incorporating inclusion. But in our conversations with experts, again, they highlight that is a necessary condition to have a long-standing and effective management of your diverse workforce is the inclusion part. And that can actually help with even the notions of address kind of retention issues and making people feel that they are part of the organization and they're willing to stay there and long enough so that they can rise in the organization.
Fair enough. So my next question has to do with the issue of versus government regulations, rules, mandates, laws, versus an industry or a business on their own taking initiative for their corporation, taking into account the unique circumstances to promote diversity and inclusion. Because sometimes I feel that the one-size-fits-all government regulations may actually have the adverse effect when you try to apply it to every business the same way. It may actually have a counter balancing effort as people worry about the regulations and start making laws to that. So apart from government efforts, what are some of the organic solutions that the firms have come up with on their own to address the diversity and inclusion challenges?
Yeah, and I think when, again, talking to experts in the area, they repeatedly say there is no single solution that works for everyone. And so there has to be flexibility, there has to be innovation occurring. But in order, to make that effective is there has to be sufficient information sharing. Venues like this, the kind of work this subcommittee will do, will contribute to that. But for, whether it's federal agencies through their OMWI offices or the private sector and what they're doing, sharing information about practices that have been effective in their case, and also reporting on any assessments that they've done is critical to getting information out about the range of options that are available to promote diversity and inclusion.
And so the promoting diversity and inclusion across multiple businesses, or is this more of a financial services sector issue?
Well, it really does apply to everything. I mean, it applies to us as federal agencies, it applies to the financial sector and other professional services organizations.
All right, so got a minute left here, but I'll try this one more question. The GAO report that you authored describes the need to improve recruitment and retention. Those two factors will lead to the most lasting solutions to the diversity and inclusion problems. What did the data show to be the most effective and proven solutions in those two categories?
As far as we can tell, it's hard to pinpoint just one. It is everything we have heard has emphasized the multiplicity of action to address both the recruitment and the retention question.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time and testimony. Thank you, Madam Chair, for having this today. I yield back to balance my time.
Thank you very much. The gentleman from Missouri, the Chair of Housing, Community Development, and Insurance, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Beatty. Let me say that Madam Chair and Ranking Member Wagner, I appreciate you embarking on a new course by leading this new subcommittee on diversity so that diversifying America's workforce will no longer be mere lip service. As the chairman of the Federal Reserve indicated in this morning's Humphrey Hawkins hearing, it's time to move past the Rooney Rule so that not just one minority candidate is interviewed for the purpose of window dressing. And we will now refer to that new rule as the Beatty-Wagner rule. And America is made better by its rich diversity. Our institutions of higher learning are enhanced when more voices are included on campuses. Our religious institutions grow and prosper when the congregations are not segregated. Our athletic fields are more interesting when people from all walks of life are able to participate together, and our apartment buildings, neighborhoods, and co-ops are more comfortable to inhabit when not everyone looks the same, speaks similarly, or has identical neighbors on every floor. And Mr. Garcia-Diaz, let me ask you, during your research for this report, were you able to determine what percentages of financial firms provided training on unconscious bias? And did any firms note that some forms of training were found to be more successful than others, such as in-person training versus online training?
Yeah, so we don't have any figures on the frequency of the use of that kind of training to address unconscious bias. We did receive, or in our interviews with industry representatives and advocacy groups, that was definitely one of the tools to use and to address the issue of unconscious bias. Training can't do it by itself, though, and it has to be in combination with other efforts. Yeah, that's.
But you and I would agree that that's one of the major impediments, major barriers to diversifying workforces in financial services or in any other industry in this country.
Yeah, that would be a significant concern, and not just in the financial services industry, but broadly speaking.
But broadly, yeah. Sure. And so, can you offer any suggestions on how we attack that?
Well, I think just the question that you asked of how frequently, how prevalent is this type of training, how is this being used, and also the different varieties. There's, as you just pointed out, you can do online, you can do in person, you can do it in different formats. And so having more information, obtaining more information on the variety of options for training and what seems to work more would be something that's needed to really advance the ball.
Regarding retention, could you comment on what workplace inclusion practices can improve companies' minority and women retention rates?
Yeah, and I'll start off with one that I think is very important. It's holding management accountable for the organization's diversity goals, ensuring that their work, their performance, and their ability to take these matters seriously aligns with their leadership's own commitment to diversity and inclusion. Other kind of steps, practices that help, that would be helpful for retention includes employee engagement, obtaining a lot of qualitative information about what their experiences are in the firm that may not be reflected necessarily in just straight numbers.
All right. And my time is up. Thank you, Madam Chair. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gonzalez, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Garcia-Diaz, for being here today. I have a question. Has the GO looked at promotions separately from new hires? In other words, are we promoting more minorities from within? And is the rate at which minorities are promoted to management positions different from the rate that minorities are hired into management?
Yeah, and unfortunately, one of the limitations of the EEOC data is that it doesn't allow us to see people's movement within the organization, like in the case of promotion. We just see these balances, how many people in its account. But in the report, in our 2017 report, and in testimony, we look at the potential pipelines that feed into these promotions outside of the management level. And so we have statistics there that there is quite a bit of diversity in sort of professional jobs that are non-management, sales jobs that potentially the firm can draw from to promote into the higher management levels.
So the answer is we don't know.
But we don't know.
And finally, in my district, we have about an 80 or 90% Hispanic population, but we still struggle with inclusion at upper management for non-minority owned businesses. Can you advise if the GAO could get a better handle on challenges faced in the hiring of a diverse workforce? If, for example, the data was looked at on a state-specific scale or on a regional scale?
Yes, so in our 2017 report, we include some statistics on the state level based on the EOC data, but the emphasis still falls on effective recruitment strategies that firms should be adopting, again, looking broadly and doing intentional recruiting of minorities, identifying the pool, draw them in so that they have the opportunity to be interviewed, to be considered for the job. In the end of the day, it's the talents and what you bring to the table that will hopefully lead to a job, but they need to first show up at the interview, and firms have to do an effective job to draw those candidates in for consideration.
Very well. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Lawson, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Mr. Diaz, welcome to the committee. I worked in the financial services area for 36 years. And during my tenure there, what I have found out is that in most cases in the financial service industry, when they do recruit minorities into the area, oftentimes what is not discussed is that they don't really last, because they don't have the support that is needed in the area, because sometimes it's a new interest, whereas in the majority population where some of these individuals, students are exposed because of family connection and the jobs that they have in college and so forth, they have more of an appreciation on how it works and how they can move through the system. And my question would be, like, for example, I have Florida A&M University, historically HBCU, in my district that has a great school of business and engineering. And do many of the companies, are they still, from your knowledge, are they going around to recruit at the universities a couple of times a year to make sure that they can attract some of the students into the financial industry to improve diversity?
Yes, and I think one of the important points is when you're drawing folks of different backgrounds, different experiences, everyone relies to some extent to some sort of mentoring. It may be family because they've been in the business, they know it. Others don't have that. And so a forward-looking organization will be setting up either mentorship programs or some sort of sponsorship program for employees coming in to ensure that they understand how to navigate through the organization, how to progress in your career, and those are critical parts to addressing actually the retention issue. Sometimes it might be easy to get someone in the door, but then to keep them is a whole different matter. and particularly you want to set up folks for success. And so programs, and they are out there, and they exist, and we've been told that they've been quite effective in assisting folks in their career.
Right. Sometime when I'm back in the district, I do banking sometime on Saturdays because it's open from 9 until 12. And in the banking area, and this is, and I'm gonna just say this is with Bank of America. What I have noticed, the trend has been because a lot of the Hispanic members, individuals go in and bank on it. I've seen where they have increased the number of Hispanic speaking individuals in the banking industry so they can deal with all of the customers that come in. But over the last couple of years, when I've gone into those institutions, I haven't been able to see whether there had been an increase in a minority African-American representatives like they have done on the Hispanic areas in that financial institution. But I thought it was great what they did for Hispanic because sometimes there's a language barrier that some of the people can help with a little bit more. I've always viewed diversity as something that should be a part of the American way of life because the whole population in America has been changing. In your deal and in the research that you have, how do you all approach these institutions about trying to create more diversity in the workforce?
Yeah, and I think one of the important component is for whether they're banks or securities or insurance companies, whatever they are, is that they have institutionalized kind of the thinking behind diversity and inclusion in their operations, and to do it consistently across all levels, whether it's the entry-level teller kind of jobs in the bank, but thinking about how people can progress through the organization all the way to the top. And so we've identified some key practices that are essential. I mentioned a few before, like leadership commitment and accountability, but other things include data analysis, knowing what the shape of your workforce looks like, where are you losing candidates for potential promotion, what's their composition and makeup. Those are critical parts for an organization to become self-aware about how they stand, how they're doing in terms of diversity and inclusion.
Okay, thank you. I yield back, man.
Thank you. The gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean, is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I thank you for this hearing and the focus of the hearing. Thank you, Mr. Garcia-Diaz, for being here and for offering us your expertise and your guidance. I, too, echo my colleagues' sentiments about diversity being our strength. And it's not just a pretty sentiment. We actually know that it works in industry, in financial services industry, and in all industries. As we diversify, the research shows that as we have people of different ethnicities, gender, backgrounds, experiences, geography, ethnicity, the enterprise does better because they get better ideas. I represent Montgomery County and Berks County in Pennsylvania. I'm a newly elected member. I have to admit that I've been so proud of the mentorship that senior members have offered us incoming freshmen regardless of our age. And so I want to talk to you about the idea of mentorship. As I visit my area high schools, I want to talk about the talent pool and making sure that that talent pool knows of the opportunities, whether it's in financial services or other industries. So I noticed, for example, the GAO 2017 report. One suggestion for overcoming recruiting challenges was to offer programs to increase awareness of financial services. So to follow along on the line of questioning you were just having, could you describe in detail, and I'm going to give you specifics on the ground. Montgomery County is considered third most affluent county in Pennsylvania, but there are pockets of great need. Terrific resources and opportunity, but educational unevenness, economic unevenness. So I visit my Norristown area high school students. They don't know all the opportunities in front of them. And this is literally what we talked about. We need mentors in these schools at high school level, if not even earlier. Can you describe some of these relationship building, mentorship building programs? How can I get them, tap into them in the financial services industry in my 4th Congressional District? What's the curriculum look like? How are they implemented? And are there certain literally training programs for students so they can come visit financial services institutions? Can you give us some sense and how I can access it for my students?
Yeah, while we didn't look at specific types of programs that are out there, there are a lot of groups that are trying to generate these kinds of partnership between, say, a bank and a school, or the large local employer with the schools to reach out to students. And it's something, just in our conversations that we've had when we were doing the 2017 report, and we can certainly share names of certain organizations that can kind of facilitate that and help thinking. They tend to specialize that more on those type of efforts than we do. But that holds a lot of potential, and it's not only important for firms to engage their own employees, it's also important that they engage their community, because that's going to be their future workforce. And how do they bring them in through the door? How do they make sure they're aware? Because sometimes it is just, is this a possibility for me? Is this something that I could do? Conveying that clearly to certainly young folks in school right now would be very helpful. But we can get you some information on the types of organizations that can help with those kind of partnerships.
And if you could provide that to the committee, I think it would help across the country to know about things like that. Are there any best practices you can share, and/or are there any, among those programs, are there any scholarship opportunities? What can you say about those two ideas?
Yeah, I mean, we can look into it and get back to you on that. There are, I know, a lot of efforts, for instance, like in the financial literacy area, where financial institutions are engaging schools and trying to incorporate financial literacy in the curriculums and things like that, which, even though it's not directly related to this, but it does get at the partnerships that exist out there that can be leveraged to have school-age children sort of recognize this as a possible career path.
And I'm going to ask a very broad question really late in my time here, and probably it's been discussed. But what is the secret to, not at maybe the talent pool, but at the retention and hiring time and promotion? What's the secret to changing the trends that we see?
Well, I think the secret, if there is one, but I'm gonna venture a guess here,
secret, yeah.
is really that it has to be intentional, it has to be strategic, and it has to be sustained. If you don't do that, it will fall apart.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our witness, Mr. Garcia-Diaz, for your testimony today, and without objections, all members have 5 legislative days within which to submit additional written questions for the witness to the committee. You will be forwarded to the witness, and we will look forward to your response. I asked our witness to please respond as promptly as you are able to, and without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within which to submit extraneous materials to the committee for inclusion into the record. This hearing is adjourned.